Thank you. So the organization invited me to give a presentation on the RISC project, which is a project, a Horizon 2020 project that has just ended. But and actually the purpose of that project was to develop risk-based screening strategies for cervical cancer. Nothing to declare. So first I would like to give a brief overview of this project and then just to present a few risk-based screening strategies. Then I would like to spend a few words on the future of cervical cancer screening and with some conclusions. So this was a project with 11 partners. It was a very productive project. We had over 100 publications, and the website is still alive. And we also have developed a free online course that will be launched in a month. So why is the website still alive? Because the idea of risk-based cervical cancer screening is there, the concept is there, but a lot of data will emerge in the coming years that actually will be needed to further implement risk-based screening in Europe. So this is we are actually, this is how it works. It will be a project after 5 years, the project was planned. So, because the topic is still highly relevant. So if we talk about risk-based cervical cancer screening, there are several phases in which you can actually apply risk stratification, as Paul already said. For cervical cancer screening, you can actually distinguish two main phases. And I translated them in the following two questions. Who should be invited for screening, and of those that have been invited for screening, who should be referred to the gynecologist for colposcopy and biopsy? And what is so beautiful about cervical cancer screening is that we have many risk stratifiers available in the screening registries. So here is that's the low-hanging fruit, I presume, but there is a lot of low-hanging fruit in cervical cancer screening. So we have, besides the current screening results, we have information about the screening history that's just on file at the screening registries. We have information on the HPV vaccination status, and of course we also have other factors like AIDS that are actually quite important in the field of cervical cancer screening. So who should be invited for screening? That's the first question. Well, there are several approaches to this question. The first approach is just to look at your current screening program and see where you can de-intensify the program. This is, for instance, what we did in the Netherlands when we implemented HPV-based screening. In the Netherlands, we have 5-yearly screening from the age of 30 to the age of 60, and we decided to skip the screen at 45 years if you're HPV negative at the age of 40, and to skip the screen at 55 years if you're HPV negative at the age of 50. So that is sort of, you use the screening history just to prolong, to de-intensify your program. And the results of that change in strategy are currently emerging in terms of cancer risk, etc., interval cancers. But there's another approach also. So that's an approach of de-intensification. But risk stratification is also about just tailor your interventions to those at highest risk. And that's the second approach. So you try to invite immediately to screening those with the highest cancer risk. So and for that approach has often been displayed by means of a traffic light model. You have, for instance, those with a very high cancer risk, which can be set based on country-specific values, but for instance, let's say a very high cancer risk is defined as over 100 per 100,000 woman years, and then immediate screening is required, and screening, for instance, could be then be organized by sending these women immediately a self-sampling device to minimize the barriers to attend screening. Then there is the yellow group, the intermediate group. They may also be screened, but maybe in a less aggressive way. And then there is the green group, and that is the group that has a very low risk of cancer and that should not get an invitation. So this idea has actually been taken as a starting point in Sweden, where they have now implemented, where they have actually set up a nationwide registry-based trial of risk-stratified cervical cancer screening. So what they do is they look at the screening and they look at the screening history, and the screening history, in particular, they look at the previous cytology results, the previous HPV test results, and based on that, they compute cancer risk for the women and do the invitation based on that risk. That approach is quite interesting, and actually, so in cervical cancer screening, we have very strong risk stratifiers. So in the so the second last row, those are women with a history of HPV negative tests. They have an extremely low cancer risk. This is the 5-year cancer risk. But in the red boxes are strata that actually have are women that, based on their screening history, have a much higher cancer risk. And in the red boxes are actually women that have a cancer risk that is 200 till 2,000 times higher than those of women with history of negative HPV results. So these are extremely strong risk stratifiers. So that is actually, so that trial is ongoing and has been upscaled to cover most of the country in several regions, Sweden, the Stockholm region and the Malmö region, and yeah, results are actually emerging from that trial. Then there is the second question. So suppose you have been screened and you are HPV positive, then you need a triage system in order to limit the number of possibly referrals, because they are also associated with harms. And you can do that in several ways. You can do it by looking at the HPV genotype. You can look at the screening history again, because they may also still be informative even if you're HPV positive. And you can also do an extra triage test, looking at a lesion marker, for instance, cytology or methylation analysis, P16, immunohistochemical staining is also a possibility. There are several options there. In the RISC project, we mainly looked at the genotype. So what we did is we pulled data from 7 European HPV screening trials that were set up about 15 years ago. So we have 15 years of follow-up for these trials, and we pulled all the data in order to see what is the short-term and long-term risk of SIN2, SIN3 and cancer by genotype. Well, this study is mainly confirming what we already know. If we look at cancer, then 16 and 18 are by far the most dangerous genotypes. 16 is also the most dangerous type for SIN2 and SIN3, but 18 is only the most dangerous type for cancer and is not not associated with an increased SIN2 and SIN3 risk. Actually, SIN2 and SIN3 risk actually are quite high for HPV 33. So we already knew this. The nice thing of this data is that this is a huge data set. We have over 1,400 SIN3 cases. So, and also what we think is that genotype is very important in risk stratification. And also, what is also important to see here is that we have data from 7 different countries in Europe, and among HPV positive women, we see actually that the genotype distribution is very similar. So basically, we think that if you would use genotype as a basis for risk stratification, you could also might develop strategies that maybe are generalizable to multiple countries in Europe. And that is important because at the moment we have like 25 different countries in the EU, maybe even more, but we also have 25 very different cervical cancer screening programs. So, but there is a sort of biological, from a perspective of biology, things are generalizable, but still countries all do their own thing, and so I think that's also one of the goals that we had there is at least to come up with very sort of general results that can be implemented in several countries. So what about the future screening? Well, first of all, I think if we look at the future, that cervical cancer screening will become molecular. So at the moment it's not molecular, we have also a lot of cytology still, but we see that it is very difficult, particularly in countries where they have implemented HPV screening, to maintain high quality cytology. So there are, for instance, in the Netherlands at the moment, a lot of capacity problems. They don't know how to do all the cytological evaluations in time, and this problem will become even more and more bigger in the future. Many people don't want to become a cytotechnician anymore, at least not in the Netherlands and also not in other European countries. The second thing is also that molecular test can actually also be used on self-collected material, on self-samples, and that is very attractive because self-sampling is really, I think, one of a very promising way of collecting material because it lowers the barriers to attempt screening. Second of all is also what is future screening is in the future we screen vaccinated cohorts, and that really changes the game. So let's first look at genotype-based screening. So genotype-based screening is not there yet. Why not? Because 16 and 18, okay, they have a very high risk of cancer. So in some countries in Europe, they already, particularly in Sweden, they already immediately send women with the 16 and 18 infection to the gynecologist. In other countries, to my knowledge, they don't do that yet. And it's also, if you look at the average risk of Gen3 in a woman with an HPV infection and negative cytology, it's only 4%. But what we saw in long-term follow-up of an own HPV screening trial, we see that if the same type persists for 5 years, the Gen3 risk increases from 4% to 40%. So we think that HPV type persistence over a longer time is a very strong risk factor for Gen3+. And what's also nice about it, it can be measured on self-collected samples. But of course, a lot of data will emerge in the coming years to tell whether HPV type persistence is really a very effective approach to screening. Then the last slide I would like to show that how does it work for vaccinated cohorts. So to illustrate, these are data from cancer data from Sweden. They were all the cancer cases collected between 2002 and 2011, and these cases have all been genotyped. And what you see is that if you that 86% of the cancers had an HPV type that is actually already included in the bivalent vaccine. If you look at the percentage of high-risk HPV type that were included in the non-valent vaccine, we talk about 98%. I mean, so there is hardly anything left to screen after non-valent vaccination. So, of course, I mean, these are just this is just a proportion in the screen detected cases. So, but still, my main message here is that non-available vaccination, I mean, the risk of cancer becomes very, very low, and that needs to be accounted for by effective and efficient risk-based screening. So to conclude, this RISC project has been successful, but the work has not finished. Risk-based screening guidelines must be updated multiple times because of vaccination and also because of the availability and the emergence of new technologies like self-sampling, genotype tests, AI-based cytology, ventilation, etc. A lot is emerging at the moment. A lot of data also emerging. And screening registries, I think that's the most important message. The screening registries can really help us to update our risk-based screening programs. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much for inviting me to talk about some Norwegian experiences in personalized cervical cancer screening. I will both talk about some research on this topic and also some implementations that have been done in the screening program in Norway. Next slide, please. Oh, yeah, sorry. These are my disclosures. And so the next speaker, Armaroli and Nygard, and colleagues, they started quite early to look into how one could possibly do more personalized screening by using missing some lines, but actually there should be some lines in this Lexis diagram showing the screening histories for each woman. And the goal was then to use some machine learning methods to try to predict the next screening results. And that was, here you can see the Brier scores in the table, which is quite good for normal screening results, but these are very high, which means bad Brier score, or high grade. So it was very difficult to really predict which ones that got that high grade screening result based on the previous screening exams. But one important feature that was missing in these predictions was HPV tests, because these data were from the days before HPV screening was really used. But we were lucky to have a quite interesting data set with HPV genotyping of individuals coming for screening in 2006 until 2013, which was years before HPV screening was implemented. And an advantage with this data set, it has a long follow-up for using the cancer registry with all the screening results. So you can see all up until 13 years if these women later got pre-cancer or cancer. And also a nice thing with this data set is that the HPV results was not used to determine follow-up. So it's more closer to the natural history of HPV infection and later cancer development. So what we tried to do then was to use this HPV extended genotyping. It was genotyped with Luminex, so looking at around 40 HPV types. We were not concentrating on this 14 high-risk types because those are the most important for developing pre-cancer and cancer. And we also wanted to use screening age because we know that is quite important for cervical cancer development. And we used quite a lot of different machine learning methods to combine the HPV genotype, both individual types, but also looking at groups of types. So, for example, in this high priority group, we have HPV 16. In the medium priority, we have those that are less oncogenic, but still quite oncogenic, like the 18, 13, 33, 45, and 52 and 58. And then in this non-urgent group, we have those that are still regarded as high risk, but are not as oncogenic as the medium and high priority ones. And here the colors are missing a little bit in the slide, but maybe you can see the numbers. But the model that performed the best is more easy method of the POTS model. But it incorporated this screening age. And it's quite important to see here that it's not a linear effect. It's peaks around age 38. So you see that screening age is important, but also it's a huge difference between these HPV type risk groups. And we believe that this screening age is important because most HPV infections are gathered in the early 20s. And if you genotype there, you will find a lot of positivity, but most of these infections are cleared. But if you have an infection at the age of 38, then it's more likely to be a persistent infection, which is a more dangerous infection that has a much higher probability of leading to pre-cancer and later cancer. So actually for this, being HPV-16 positive and at this age of 37, I think, you have a 38% chance of developing CIN2 plus within 5 years. So this is quite high. So at the same time when we were doing this research, actually some of this was implemented in the Norwegian cervical cancer screening program. Here you can see the algorithm as it is today. You can see that it's starting to get more and more complex, and it's on the way to becoming quite personalized. Within this algorithm, it's extended genotyping of 25 to 29-year-old women. So, based on the results for these younger women, you have these 3 HPV risk groups. So if you have a positive for a high priority or medium priority, then you'll get the cytology reflex test. But if you have this non-urgent type, also this younger group, then you are actually not going to cytology, but you are getting an HPV test in 3 years. Then there are some results that are a bit related to what Hans showed. Actually, looking at the second round of HPV screening, because HPV screening was started in 2015 in Norway, and around from 2019, we had the second screening round for these women. And also we have some years of follow-up, so you can see compare what happens after the second round to after this first round. But here importantly, for this cohort 2, they were HPV negative in the first round. And actually, this has quite a lot of impact on the probability of later developing CIN3 plus. You see for HPV-16, here you have the round 1 data. They are much more likely to develop CIN3 plus than those that were HPV-16 positive in the round 2. But all these were HPV negative in round 1, and that's probably why we see this difference. Because in round 2, since they were HPV negative in round 1, this is a more recent infection, while in round 1, this HPV-16 were positive for probably for a more persistent infection. And actually, these results were used to change the screening program. So this was this comparison of the round 1 and round 2 data was done by Jørgen Engesæter and others. And based on these results, it was a change in the screening program so that HPV-16 positive women that are HPV negative in the previous screening rounds, and we know high-grade cytology in the last 6 years are given a new HPV test in 1 year instead of colposcopy referral. Then I'll show some quite interesting results we have on this methylation marker. So we have used this GenTech assay, and the data that I just talked about with those women coming for screening from 2006 to 2013 were followed using the registries until 2019. We took those LBC samples and performed DNA methylation. And then we followed, had already followed these women, so we can pick, or actually first we picked cases and controls. So we picked cases that, those were the ones also called HPV progressors. So those developed symptom plus, and the controls, they did not have any abnormal cytology in screening history. And then we matched these controls by HPV type and screening age. And then we used the samples from 2006 until 2013 for this, and did the DNA methylation test. And here you see a lot of figures, but we can concentrate on these 3 HPV risk groups. And the orange one is the ones that were methylation positive, and the blue ones were those that were methylation negative. And you see this huge difference in the probability of getting a SIN3 plus. It's a huge difference for all these 3 HPV risk groups. And what we also see is that it's such a strong marker that so these 3 lines represent these 3 HPV risk groups. But you see that even for this non-urgent HPV group, when you add on the methylation test, you have a really high risk of getting SIN3 plus. And it's even higher than for those that were in this HPV16 group, but were DNA methylation negative. So we believe that there's a great chance that this marker can be implemented in the screening program. So just to sum up all these components that can be used in a more personalized or risk-based screening. I mentioned this HPV genotype and screening age, and screening history, and DNA methylation. All of these are maybe more related to how to follow up based on the results on these tests, but also, as Hans talked about, the question about who to screen as well. And there you have some features that can be used that are quite important, like the birth cohort, which can be very important because when you start vaccinate some cohorts, you can see the effect of this vaccination on HPV 16 and 18 prevalence. So I was asked to give some experiences from Norway, but I've stolen this from Sweden because we are such good neighbors. But it really shows the effect. Here you have the birth cohorts on the x-axis, and you can see how the prevalence of HPV 16 and 18 really sharply decreases for each cohort. Here you see in the gray, you see the proportion that were unvaccinated. So when you see that more and more are vaccinated in these cohorts, you see this fall. But this reduction is even stronger than the proportion that are vaccinated, which shows that it is some herd effects come into play as well. So it seems that it's almost eradicated HPV 16 and 18 in these vaccinated cohorts, where the previous cohorts have been vaccinated as well. So this, of course, is very important in deciding whether you should screen these cohorts. And then you have individual vaccination status that have been mentioned as important. But one observation, maybe it's a bit hard here to see because it's missing some lines here. But you can see this, you don't see the line, there's a line here for those that were vaccinated, which is much lower. This is from Scotland, actually, where you have a quite high HPV vaccination coverage. But here is a line for those that were unvaccinated. And actually, we see due to this herd effect, it's actually coming into the same level. This is HPV 16 and 18 prevalence. So for these cohorts, vaccinated and the unvaccinated individuals have about the same prevalence for HPV 16 and HPV 18, meaning that maybe the birth cohort is as important as the individual vaccination status. But this is for a population with very high HPV coverage and might be lower in many countries. And then I'll just end with showing this quite complicated diagram for the screening program for Norway. And when we start to include more of these features, it becomes more and more complex. And then the question is, should one even use such diagrams? Or should one use some other tools, like software or something, where you put in these variables and then let the computer help you to decide the right decision? Okay, thank you.
Yes, I would like to good afternoon now, morning, everyone. Just want to say that Cancer Register Norway is responsible for organizing population-based screening programs for cervical breast colorectal cancer screening. And we have done it all the time, so we have quite a lot of data and experience on this field. And regardless, we talk about mass screening or RISCC screening. What do we need is data. We need qualitative data, good data. We need the population level data. We need to collect them. We need to curate them. We need to analyze them. We need to evaluate the harms, evaluate the effects of our actions. We need to evaluate the new things which we are implementing and how it is affecting everything. So data is extremely important in this business. And I really don't know how I can say anything new after all these nice presentations. Perhaps only the new perspective, a different perspective, not even new. So just wanted to show how we can get our data. I mean, this is the development of cervical cancer screening prevention, sort of historical evolution in the cytology, which was first published 2028 already, and 42 by Papa Nicolau. This concept was put into the mass screening in 1960s, 70s. And people in the countries like Nordic countries and Canada and perhaps many others started to have those screening programs and collect the data they actually reduced very much cervical cancer with using this approach. And then the game changer, which 1983 came, who is the group from Germany, discovering the link between HPV 16 and cervical cancer, which sort of sparked enormous research activities. It was accelerating the research on HPV and cervical cancer natural history, the methodology, how to detect HPV, vaccine development started with the discovery of VLPs and forward was even automated HPV pap reading, in this time. And then it all ended up in 2000, beginning of the 2000, when Australia came and people started to actually implement high-risk HPV tests in the triage of the cytology screening. And I would like to say 2006, when the RISCC study, which you also referred to, was first time published and showed that HPV, high-risk HPV surpasses pap testing as a primary screening test. This year also 4-valent vaccine was first licensed. And during the next years, the global breakthrough started with the superior performance of HPV screening in several randomized control trials. It also came information on studies on self-sampling using vaginal and urine specimens. There was a 2-valent HPV vaccine license. Then followed by 9-valent vaccine licensed, global WHO goal for elimination of cancer. And in the end of the 2000s, we had a multiple CE-marketed HPV test for primary screening available. It started to be more HPV genotyping, and now in 2020s, looking for the studies showing that HPV cell sampling is as good as cervical sampling, and we're doing the research for optimal follow-up of HPV positive tests and screening vaccinated populations, and really research and managing a risk on individual societal level. But I mean, what information we have, it's really what we are collecting and what we are doing. So a lot of our risk models is also based on data what we have. So far in Norway, the mass screening which we do still is the efficient data management system. Until recently, we said that PAPS tests should be taken every 3 years interval. This requires pelvic exam every 3 years interval and cytology test. It requires women to come to screening 16 times during the when you have just nothing abnormal, and then it's diagnostic confirmation and so on. In our databases, it really is 1.9 million women with 40 million exams. In 2022, we had about 400,000 screenings. We did 34,000 histologies and more than 8,000 treatments. And when we analyze this data, we know that 90% are normal and 2% suggest diseases. There is a 10 to 5% suggest something is going on. We don't know exactly what to do, and 3% are technical failures. So this information, what we collect, gives us a lot of sort of what to go forward. We know that most people never get anything else than normal tests, right? And we know also that we treat a lot of people. Those upper lines here, the CN3 and CN2 by age, and the green line is cervical cancer. So we probably overtreat women by far in sort of preventing cervical cancer, pressing this cervical cancer down or line down here. So this is a sort of harms of the program, so the screening and overtreatment. And what should do? Should we have an accurate screening technology? Yes, we have a lot of suggestions. Need risk assessment before inviting to screening, probably based on HPV test, as Paola also, based on cytology, as Paola showed. We have done a development of the prediction algorithms based on exam history data. We did logistic regression, decision tree, random forest, gradient boosting trees, neural networks, geometric deep learning models, hidden marker models. Well, the result was really that it demonstrates the potential for generating this production algorithm. But this was without HPV, and it looks like HPV data is needed in further research, but we only added HPV in our screening program 2015 in part of the population. HPV types started to come into more in end of the 2000s, so we have barely only one screening interval. And so you need this real-world evaluation. So we think that yes, HPV technology can make a lot. We can have a longer screening intervals, and we don't need this tedious cytology. We can have the self-sampling, and we don't need people to come to the pelvic exam any longer. But optimal follow-up, as pointed out by previous, is really a problem, because those are those algorithms which our doctors should deal with, and you haven't escalated or we haven't scaled up our systems to make doctors to navigate this new world of different street lights, sort of how to allocate. And I think if we do now the analysis and see, for example, what is how people follow the guidelines, so we get a shocking results. So yes, that concept is of course excellent. We need to have a harmonizing the risks, providing the treatment according the risks. That was not a novel idea, it was presented already in 2008. The challenge is really operationalize this one. So we need efficient systems for data management, analysis, distribution of the results to people, to doctors, and so on and so forth. But I also want to bring into attention that we still have this unequal cancer burden in Europe. Where you see Eastern Europe is burdened more with the cervical cancer, both incidence and mortality. And when we look on the socioeconomic factors, we see that Eastern, Southern, and Northern European people have utilize the pap test in Europe less. Within each country, the immigrants come less to screening compared to natives, and especially when they come from other non-EU states. We know that education level says that lower education comes less to screening compared to high education, and also the income has the same type of gradient. So in some, we need also to think how this risk-based screening will address this type of problems. And also what is mentioned here is human behavior. Really, we can make a lot of interesting studies, which is in the context and published peer-reviewed evidence, but when this new knowledge is a round shape, and then the shape is squared, which goes into the people's head, that it just doesn't go in. Even the child knows that, right? Because people have their own cognitive abilities, personality factors, individual preferences, societal preferences, and this winning, which is we are always sort of coming from the social media and all, which is affecting us. And at the end, people do value happiness, pleasantness, and rewarding when they actually make this decision that they come and not to come to screening. So communication and understanding this aspect is massively underestimated, actually, and addressed in current screenings, I would say. And just what is also mentioned here, that when we get these vaccinated populations in our screenings, this is a game changer. We think now we sort of did our interval a little bit longer. We perhaps will go over the self-sampling quite soon. But when we have more and more those vaccinated individuals, dependent on whether it is a multi-cohort vaccination, single cohort vaccination, female or gender-neutral vaccination, which vaccine has been chosen to in this particular countries and the people. I mean, what has mentioned that maybe we need as much as only 2 screenings per lifetime, even around even less of that. So, and what we get then of data, I mean, we don't get any data if we reduce the screening intervals. There is no data to make the personalized algorithms any longer, because you predict based on data which you have collected. You collect less data, you predict less. So that's, of course, is the dilemma. So my last slide. When we want to enhance stability and speed of cervical cancer screening programs, by the way, Marcis, I think it was a very difficult topic. So I really struggled, but I think that this would be my taking points. We need to prioritize really data collection and utilization, and need to value high quality data, skill management. This is a cornerstone of any informed medical decision, and we need to, put on the agenda user-friendly feedback to assure adherence to the clinical management algorithms, both for medical and for the people. Of course, we need to integrate the novel and advanced technologies to increase efficiency and accuracy. But we need to keep a focus on real-world impact and assessing it through implementation research. I think this is a very important part of any screening and any prevention strategies in the way forward. Increase accessibility and community engagement through boosting awareness and strengthening outreach research, which we do too little. Integrating the prevention program, vaccine and screening are still quite unclear how we should do and what should we do. So we need here also real-world evidence. We need to downscale screening and address some emerging topics such as site replacement, which some people have been publishing lately, or clinical unmasking, which for risk. And then personalized risk-based screening is going forward with risk stratification for the interval and follow-up. And that is what I would like to conclude. Thank you.